So the first big mistake that OG makes is when they try to characterize cities like Halifax or Quebec City as being small places when one of the members of our panel is literally from Montreal. So proud to oppose. I think that the first problem that I'm just going to identify with this bench is that they don't acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of big consulting firms, banks, and other major financial corporations that they like to talk about in a lot of the middle-level cities that they try to characterize to you as being smaller level, but I think are very much not small level. I think that you should note the piece of clarification that I offered. I think that like a lot of these cities, if they have the type of economic activity that exists in Halifax, are still going to have in some capacity the same amount of ability to provide the financial benefits that they talk about, and therefore I think that this renders a lot of their case and material on economic benefits from big cities as being highly symmetrical. But another key piece of refutation from this is the way in which we are able on OO to access the same impact, right? Because as Simon identifies, there are already multiple other media corporations who understand this mechanism that they're talking about and utilize it very frequently. Look at what happened during the Taylor Swift Eras tour. Look at what was happening with, Ottawa's trying to elect a new nightlife minister to promote more nightlife in Ottawa to make sure that there is more economic activity in the city. There are lots of other ways that you can access this increased economic activity for the world that they want to try and get. Whereas on our side of the house, there are a few exclusive benefits that you get when you have a city that is very sports-oriented, engaging in sports marketing. You are accessing a very unique market, a very dedicated market that you know is going to consistently give you money over time, and additionally create this positive feedback loop in these cities where when you host successful events in smaller cities, this is going to demonstrate to advertisers and other people that this city is somewhere that has a lot of economic activity present, and therefore lead to more events being run in these cities, therefore leading to increasing marketing, increasing funds for those cities, etc., etc. But first I'm going to do some quick weighing and touch on back half. So this is why I think Simon's points on community are ultimately going to be the most important thing in this route, because being able to curate a vibe in a community is extremely important, not just for developing the culture of those communities, but also for the economic benefits and other things that we talk about. We think that no one is going to want to go to the games in your city if there is nothing there in the city to enjoy, or if people just don't enjoy hanging out with each other in those cities. I think we have a unique advantage on our side of the house for this, using added characterization that I'm about to give you right now, which is the case that in a lot of smaller cities, there is this increase in community that Simon is talking about. You know your neighbor. You're going to talk to Joe Schmo on the street. I literally had a conversation with my Uber driver about this on the way home last night, where we were talking about how, despite being surrounded by so many people in big cities, you rarely know who your neighbor is. And I think that is really sad, but it is the truth. In a lot of cities, people just feel unsafe generally around each other because you are surrounded by so many strange people who you do not know. So people do not engage as much in these large community events, which means that you're going to have a lot harder time curating those vibes that OG really wants to have in order to lead to the economic benefits that they are talking about. But second, just on the pure financial perspective, let's use some very clear standard weighing here, okay? With $1 million in a big city, you can maybe get 3 billboards. But in a small city, you can get 5 billboards. 5 billboards that are going to be way more successful at attracting people to your events, because there will be less eyes in that city who are more likely to see your billboards and therefore go to your events and give you more money. And that money can go a lot further in that positive feedback loop mechanism that I gave you to create bigger and better events into the future. Also, look back at the mechanism I gave you previously about how exclusive the way in which we are able to access this impact is, using all of the unique characterization that we provided to you about small cities. And also, if we want to clash with this new material that came out from OG about talent, essentially, you are able to receive more talent on our side of the house because of the fact that, one, a lot of these hometown players are actually coming from a lot of the small cities that we talked about. Why is this going to be the case? 2 key reasons for this. One, it is actually really, really hard work to go pro, okay? You need to be in the sport for many, many years, invest a lot financially into the sport, travel a lot, you're putting a lot of your life into this activity. Therefore, it means that you have to be very, very dedicated in order to do that sport. What does that mean? Probably really dedicated cities are going to get these types of players. What a surprise! We already see this in the status quo with the examples that OG provides in their speech, okay? There's also this narrative that exists in sports of the hometown hero, right? Everyone loves a small town boy who, worked really hard and became super, super good at hockey or whatever, and now is like super awesome, right? So we think for that reason, there's already a lot of hometown people who are super interested in engaging with the sport. CG, give me your case right now.
It is precisely because other forms of community are less accessible in large cities that sports are such a unique motivating factor for community. We know this to be empirically true because even large alienating cities like Los Angeles have massive fandoms within their local sports.
Listen, okay, this is a piece of refutation that I wanted to give to OG, okay? I don't think that cities like Florida or Los Angeles, where there's already this currently very highly established sports base, are relevant to this round. We are not talking about cities like that, guys. We are talking about places like Ohio, places like Utah, places, well, maybe they're not large, maybe places more like Texas, where like there isn't currently an established fan base, and we are creating an established fan base there, okay? Again, I think that we are getting a lot of very unfair burdens pushed onto us by our government bench that we do not need to match in this round. We do not need to concede to the idea of teams moving to other cities. We do not need to concede to the idea that, the Los Angeles hockey team or whatever is going to be like way better than like our small town teams. Ultimately, I think that, even if you are going to push that burden onto us, panel, all of the refutation and extra characterization and rebuilding of Simon's case that I have provided to you is ultimately going to, beat those types of things. Some quick weighing of what I think is going to come out of back half. Honestly, I feel like based on what we've heard from CG so far, they're going to have a derivative case. So, look very closely at the mechanisms that exist between those two. But if we want to touch on OO, I think me and Simon went for the low-hanging fruit here and proved some very certain impacts. CO is going to have to prove some very large and tangible impact in order to win this debate over us. And I don't think they're going to do that. Also, Adam's hair looks dumb, and he took my POI, so what the hell, Adam? Very proud on that basis to oppose.
Okay, everyone ready? There's a deadlock in top half that's absolutely critical for our opening. It's simply this. Opening tells you that primarily you can make use of existing sports cultures and existing sports teams to make sure you have inroads into these new cities that don't already have hockey fans. But opening opposition tells you that, people won't want to watch these teams because you're competing with them. They have only so much capacity to watch sports, which means they won't invest when sports cultures already exist. This is going to be our primary extension. Why will fans in these existing sports cities also invest in watching hockey? Because presumably this attention trade-off makes sense. Several reasons. The first thing I want to notice is that the idea that Dallas does not have dedicated hockey fans is absolutely absurd. Like, one of my best friends is from Minnesota. He loves hockey. Now he lives in San Jose. The thing to notice is that, the teams that the NHL is likely to invest in that are rated in the info slide are the fastest growing cities in North America. They have people from all over the continent. They have people from New England. They have people from the Pacific Northwest, so on and so forth, who want hockey teams who have grown up watching hockey. Second, I think there's just a large degree of bandwagon effect that happens when these teams initially come in. This is partly the advertising argument that comes out of opening. But secondly, I think there's just a novelty that exists for just random people who have never watched hockey to be able to go into a hockey game. And I think this is what actually hooks people in, insofar as you get to see Connor Bedard just punching someone in the middle of the ice rink or something. Okay. The most substantive mechanism I'm going to provide is just that demand significantly outpaces supply for sports consumption. That is, a significant amount of investment, money, time, and effort needs to go into producing a sports game. That is, the practice, the preparing of the rink, so on and so forth. But at the level of consumption, you only spend 2 hours watching the game. That is, people want to watch sports, but there are just not enough sports to watch because you can just watch another sports that's 2 hours on the second night, right? So the capacity for watching sports is not actually limited insofar as the level of consumption for sports is so little. What does this mean? I think primarily, first, people just like will tune in to a second night of watching sports insofar as they're probably interested in the geographic team. But secondly, there's profit for organizations that do things like sports. That is, sports bars can just fill an empty night where there were no sports to be played by playing like the hockey game of their local city, which means people come into these bars, create community, watch the games, so on and so forth. This can also happen at the space of like public institutions like parks or like theaters and arenas that do watch parties and stuff like that. Thirdly, I want to talk about like who are we competing with in terms of sports attention. Firstly, like baseball and soccer are just like, they're either like tiny or dying. So like most people are probably not competing, like hockey is not competing with these sports. The secondly is about football, which is that the football season is relatively small compared to like the basketball or hockey season. And like the propensity of games is significantly fewer insofar as like people don't play back-to-back football games. The third thing is we're just competing with like basketball, which plays a similar amount of games in the season as hockey or has a overlapping schedule. But I think people will just tune into 2 games a night or like be intrigued by the novelty of a new game or a new team coming in. Yeah, sure.
Games last like 3 hours because of ad breaks. How are you tuning into 2 games a night? You don't have the bandwidth for it for yourself.
Sorry. 2 games a week, like 2 nights a week. Like I don't think this is a like huge deal. Like people will like do this. They already do this presumably if there are other sports you're competing with, right? Okay, why is this analysis unique? I don't think you're able to reach this level of buy-in when you just deal in cities that are already big in hockey for several reasons. The first thing is that, again, people already have teams that they're aligned to, and I think it's much easier to get people to tune into 2 nights a week of something they geographically align with, insofar as more people feel geographically aligned with their city as opposed to people in that city who feel aligned with the sport. So 2 nights of hockey for most people is more boring than 2 nights of watching a Dallas team. Secondly, I think I think you actually flip or like we significantly win margins on the arguments that OO is providing insofar as we've proven like to a significant degree that you can actually get people to watch sports even if sports cultures already exist in these cities and these cities are larger and therefore you get more people to be engaged in community like going to a sports bar and meeting friends or like tuning in on a Thursday night at your house, so on and so forth. I think this extension is clearly winning insofar as this deadlock is critical as it probably like mitigates a large degree of the offense that OG gives because they have to prove primarily that they're able to win a significant amount of support in cities that already have sports cultures, little unintuitive, and they haven't explained the nuance there. Second extension I'm going to posit is on capital and investment. The first thing I want to say is that OO has not met their burden. I'm not sure why I care about people in Halifax more than I care about people in Houston. There's going to be investment in both of these communities. Like the other thing is like economically, when you build big sports arenas or big neighborhoods, you have to do it in lower income communities or farther out suburbs that don't have as much investment because the land is really expensive in the city center, right? You're probably going to move out if you do need to do a new arena, which means it's not as expensive, but secondly, you're providing investment to a community that previously did not have it. But first, I think OG is probably just winning on this clash because I don't think like Donald Trump wants to restart the Hartford Whalers, but he probably wants to own the New York Rangers. Like there's just a significant degree of prestige here that's taking place. But the most important extension we're going to posit here is just on capital asymmetry. The thing to notice is that small hockey cities have already maxed out in terms of their development, public ranks, high schools having leagues, so on and so forth. So I think the marginal product of more investment into these hockey cultures is little, insofar as people already play hockey and already develop their hockey skills. Versus building hockey rinks in newer places means more people get the optionality to try at hockey. This is significant insofar as people might not be good at basketball, but might be great at hockey for just random genetic reasons or random just like reasons of their upbringing, or they might be more intrigued by the ice when they live in Texas. This means that we're giving more people the ability to play sports that they're good at or derive utility from or maybe are able to go pro from versus sports markets or development markets that are already saturated. And I think we're winning on the utility clash here as well. Why is it the case that we actually get more investment? The first is just capacity. That is, there's more space and like the marginal product of building a new public rink is higher, so you have more capacity and larger incentive from the NHL to do things like development because it results in bigger players. The second is on asymmetry. The thing to notice here is that big investors that are going to invest in your city have significantly more power to compare to the Halifax city government than they do to the Houston city government. That is, city governments can do things like put pressure on larger investors when they themselves have more budget or they themselves have more power to veto, to demand things like public investments, to demand things like more parks, more public spaces next to stadiums. This means that in this argument, we're getting more development, which is probably good for all teams at large. But secondly, we're able to get more things like community because you can force teams, or at least teams have a larger incentive in addition to do things like invest in building up communities and stuff like that. Thirdly, I think we're just like, I don't know, like you probably don't get ripped off by like a random stadium because Halifax City government probably recognizes this like incentive that OO provides and then gets stuck with the short end of the deal when they have to negotiate with this power, which is significantly asymmetrically more powerful than them. That's all. Thank you.
All right. I thank that speaker for those remarks and invite the member of OP to continue the round.
Whose paper is this?
It's probably mine, sorry.
You're good. Adam, can you catch? Thank you. The big question from government is, oh, people in Halifax already really like hockey. They already care. What's the margin? And I think the margin is maybe we should cater to people who actually give a shit about the sport instead of spending all our time and attention on trying to compete for the attention of fans in Houston who are already spoiled for choice in terms of the sports teams that they get to support. I think we should care about the people for whom hockey is the only thing that they have in their hometown because they don't have a basketball team, they don't have a football team, they don't have a lacrosse team. That's where the real impact in this debate lies. Here's how we're going to beat opening opposition. I think opening opposition actually does a fairly good job of explaining why these teams are likely to be successful at the threshold that we require them to be. Yeah, they're not going to become hugely, massively rich teams, but they're going to be good enough to not go bankrupt. I'm going to add some more material there. I think they do a good job there. Where I don't think they really do a great job is explaining in detail why it matters so much to get additional buy-in from these fans. Not buy-in, but what do we actually provide them? It's not just that they make them more fans or mega fans, but it's we provide them really tangible benefits that enhance their access to sport in ways that we think are meaningful. That's the crux of the extension. The first thing I want to do is deal with this framing that comes from opening government about money, right? You see this, not surprising that Vidit didn't want to actually talk about sports and instead wanted to make this an econ round. And then Ethan had to save his ass by trying to convert those into reasons as to why money is actually really important for this sport, right? But if you look at all of the things that come out from OG, you'll notice that there's an underlying assumption that the NHL is strapped for cash, that it's really poor, that it needs more money to pay these players because they're not getting paid enough, that it's the lowest paid sport in the league, and these teams are going bankrupt. The NHL, factually, is actually doing really fucking well right now. It's recording record amounts of revenue. More people are watching than ever. You're getting both TV deals, and tons of people are coming to watch in-person events after COVID, right? And yes, this is a fact claim, but also theirs is a fact claim, right? But I also want to know, things like the Coyotes going bankrupt, good fucking riddance. They were a relatively new team, not an old team that had tons of support. Yeah, and that shows that more people, more rich investors are willing to put money into hockey teams. That the fact that the NHL is expanding, that it has more teams, that there's so much money going to the fucking Florida Panthers shows that people are putting more money because they see promise and growth in this sport. Yeah, inevitably some of those teams are going to fail. That's what happens in growth, but we think that's a good thing, right? So that's the first thing, is that the NHL is factually doing actually quite well. But the second thing is that players and teams demonstrate a revealed preference, note that down, jargon word, revealed preference for actually not giving that much about money, for preferring the sport over money. NHL is probably the only league that I know where top players will take a salary cut so that their team can get other good players on the team. I could never conceive of even my king LeBron James taking a pay cut, even though he's injured and old. He's still getting paid $50 million a year, and the Lakers can't get a fucking good center. DeAndre Ayton, are you kidding me? Right, anyways, getting distracted, right? This is the only sport where players will take salary cuts and make less money because they care so much about the sport. And so maybe it's fine if they don't make as much money, and it's more important that they're able to rep the things that they care about, their hometown, the sport that they care, right? So that's why their money frame and all their impacts relating to money in the profit NHL probably do matter, but not that much in the grand scheme of things. The crux of the extension, why is it so important for us to cater to existing fans? right? The reason why is because hockey, and note, right, a lot of these cities, you know, what was it, Hamilton, Halifax, right? These aren't just cities, small cities, these are Canadian cities. Because in this country, Canada, hockey is more than just a sport, it's part of our national identity. Every country kind of has sport as part of its national identity. And in Canada, hockey is ours. Even if maybe it's not for you, for so many people, that was the thing, hockey nights in Canada, you know, that was a guy, it was an icon to him, they grew up watching hockey, right? It's the thing that we take pride in the Olympics, right? Even if you're not a hockey fan, we had that world, countries against a country in the NBA, and it was Canada versus America. Like, I don't really watch that much hockey, but I was fucking pissed when we lost to America, right? And I was really fucking happy when we beat them again in the finals. It's something that people get involved in. It's a way to participate in your country and the people around you, and that form of community building is really important. And not just on a national identity, but I also talk about regional and local identities. No, thank you, right? Like, if you're a smaller town in Minnesota, maybe American national identity is like football, but you really care about hockey and that's your hometown thing. And you being able to access that at a more meaningful level means a lot to you because that's how you connect with your community. So what do we provide them when we invest and we prioritize these small market cities? The first is the accessibility of attending games in person. And just flat out, watching a game on the TV is not the same as attending a game in person. This is true of literally any competitive event. Online tournaments, debate tournaments are nothing like in-person tournaments. Online video game tournaments are nothing like in person, right? And especially for hockey, when I can't see the puck on the TV because it's so damn small and it moves so fast, in person is different, right? The roar of the crowd, the in-game rituals that people do every time with your sports team, right? That you can feel the energy around you that is palpable, the tension, right? These are all the things that make sports feel alive, that make you remember where the moment where your team scored that really clutch goal, you're able to upset a way bigger team. Those are the things that stick with you for the rest of your life, right? And the thing is, you can't access those when it's expensive as shit to fly from Canada to Montreal, and it's even more expensive to buy a ticket in Montreal because you earn a Halifax salary, but you have to pay Montreal prices, right? We know how expensive Raptors games are, even though the Raptors are dog shit right now, because they're simply in a big city where people can afford to pay more money, right? We want to let people be able to attend games regularly, to take part in their national identity and their regional identity in a way that doesn't just have to take place on a small box in their living room, but rather is something that takes place all around them that they can really feel. No, thank you. Second, impact is that you get to have hometown heroes and you get to have hometown pride, right? It's a really special thing to feel pride for the heroes, and I thank you. The sports heroes that come from your hometown, and as we've heard from every single team, those heroes often do come from the small market teams. That Sidney Crosby did come from Halifax, right? To be able to see him, right? Why is that different than just having pride, national pride in the Canadians in general, right? Like, there's a special pride I have in the Mississauga Steelheads, not just because they're kind of shit, but even when I see them play, that they play in the rinks that I skated in when I grew up, right? That's where they practice, right? That I know some of their families just by nature of being involved in that community, that they know the city around me, right? That they will often practice in Streetsville where I grew up, that they're steeped in the tradition of the place where I grew up and the most important memories of my life happen, right? I would say that is a special kind of connection that you have to sports that not only is important for people, but is often one of their most largest sources of happiness. The third thing is that you get to keep the dreams of a lot of young hockey players, because when you bring in an NHL team into a city, it's not just the team, but you install a also larger pipeline down to the lower levels as well. So you can see a pathway for you to maybe being in the NHL or playing higher leagues, and you not just have your dreams crushed as a AA hockey player because you didn't happen to grow up in the right city and you don't want to move away. We think more players are likely to stay. We think that you give the people who care about the sport most and don't have anything else the greatest access to something that matters to them. We're incredibly proud to oppose.
All right, I think I'll end with those remarks and invite Del Witt to close out Del Ben. Here it is.
There are two conflicting frames in this round, one from OG, one from CO, about the state of the NHL financially. We'll win under both frames. Firstly, on the path to victory through OG's framing. I think that what their framing gives you is that the short term is key, but the problem is that their short term implicates that we need to increase ticket sales now, because even if we're phasing towards streaming deals, the fans are still the primary source of revenue per the PM, which means that Yamin's explanation of why we get more fans and why we're actually able to fill the missing hole in OG's case about why we're able to outcompete other local sports is key to winning under their framing. But secondly, we win under the path to victory, we have a path to victory, under the CO reframe about why the NHL is quite good, because our impact is scalar. That is, unlocking even more capital allows you to do even more development, allows you to do development in multiple places at once. Here's a really critical kind of ground-breaking frame, which is just that we can do the comparative right now where we expand into large market areas, garner the capital that we need, and then reinvest it in new phases of development, like PM tells you, into these smaller areas. Therefore, the burden on Op Bench is not to defend a strict comparative where the one and the other cannot coexist, but it's to defend the time trade-off that exists in the time at which we have to actually garner the capital in order to get the investment into these small businesses. The third thing I'm going to do is rebuild on the consumption capacity that Eamin proves to you. The first thing is that sports scheduling will be done well, responding to Adam's POI. Firstly, if we assume CO's frame to be true, the NHL's planners must be relatively competent such that they are succeeding right now. But secondarily, there are obvious internal team incentives for planning of games to be relatively good. For instance, the players themselves are fans of the game and probably want to watch other teams play and therefore don't want their games to be scheduled at the same times as others. But more strongly, they just need time to rest, time to recover, time to travel, which means that games will always be spaced out relative to each other. But thirdly, investors bring on new analysts who have the ability to understand, and this is not a very hard or complex thing to understand, that if you schedule two games at the same night at the same time, there will not be as much of a market to capitalize on because there is a direct trade-off between viewers. Therefore, they will probably just not do this. And even if there is some scheduling class in the first place, you're likely to be able to prioritize basically clashing your schedules with the teams that probably and the games that probably won't garner as much viewership, and therefore they can adjust to the way that the market shifts. The fourth thing I'm going to do is charitably engage with OO, because I don't think OG does this. The two things that OO brings is firstly that there is like a capital trade-off with small cities, and that small cities need more investment because it's a unique investment stream, which is sort of similar and parallel to the argument from CO. The thing that I'm going to prove, which takes out both op-bench teams, is that there is no capital trade-off in these small cities' investment. Firstly, because it can happen after the time lag, but secondarily, because I think that the NHL is just probably smart enough to know that if there is a large market base that is relatively close to small cities, such as Toronto, such as Montreal, where an existing team exists, you will likely prioritize investment on our comparative into these kinds of cities so that people in Quebec City, people in Halifax can travel a relatively short distance and still get a lot of the access to the impacts that they give you. But the second thing that OO talks about is why you get investment in local markets due to tourism. The problem here is, again, I'm not understanding why, and per like the DLO's frame, we understand that there are already other ways of getting capital in these areas. Like the DLO literally says, there are existing capital streams, there are firms, there are businesses. We don't know why the investment is going to be a large margin on their side of the house. But secondarily, Eamin explains to you why the kinds of investment that you get, even if you do get capital on their side, is likely to be spent much worse because the cities themselves have comparatively less ability to actually direct funding to the places that matter, which means that the kind of development you get on their side is stuff that solely benefits the league. It means constructing new stadiums that gentrify neighborhoods, that push out existing tenants. That means that you get less local businesses, which means the consumer spending power of these places goes down, which just causes short-term harms.
Okay, so have you seen how long it takes for anything to be constructed in Toronto? We think that it's totally yes, that larger cities automatically have accelerated construction rates and are going to develop in the ways that you talk about.
The thing is, per OG, which is like pretty smart, you can just convert existing stadiums, or you can just like find a place that is relatively outside city limits to do so. I think that, again, the planning committees that we talk about and the analysts that you get are probably smart enough to do this analysis. The fifth thing I'm going to do is respond to CO. I think their claim is like cogent, and it is true that there are small cities that have like stronger fans. We ought to, on a somewhat principle or at least utilitarian level, care about them. The problem is that, again, the NHL knows that these people exist and can do their planning on our comparative in ways that are smart, or can just delay it. But I think that even in the short term, right, if we succeed in the comparative, we get the kinds of buy-in and hometown hockey fan support that they want on their side as well. Because if it is, in the long term, we get the kind of success that they want as well on our comparative. Because if it is true that we are proving to any extent that you actually build up hockey cultures in places like Houston, in places like Las Vegas, or I guess that already happened, whatever our comparative is per the motion itself, then all of the kinds of hometown hockey benefits that they get, the reasons that they give you, such as growing up around hockey, exist on our side in the medium to long term because these cities become hubs of hockey, because there exist hockey subcultures within neighborhoods in these cities. So all the things that they tell you can perfectly exist for people in Texas, etc. I don't know why we ought to care about the hockey fans that already exist rather than giving people new access to new opportunities, which A, seems more just because now we have more people that can engage with the kinds of really unique benefits that CO says that hockey brings, but secondarily, it just seems more utile because the people who exist in places where they haven't been exposed to hockey can feel the thrill, like Eamin said, of like experiencing the unique parts of the hockey game in ways that they haven't before, which means that the marginal utility that they get from watching a hockey game is relatively more than the kinds of access that you get on their side. The next thing that I'm going to explain is why they don't have access to like unique mechanisms such as rivalries in order to fuel this kind of enjoyment. Because we get rivalries on our side as well. When you create new teams, they must necessarily form rivalries, otherwise they will just fail in the market. They probably have existing rivalries that they'll play off of for all of the reasons that OG frames to you. For instance, they will probably align with teams that already exist in these places, which means they can ride on the same geographical rivalries that already exist in the status quo in other sports. There are probably cultures to capitalize on. I'll take CO really briefly. Wait, what? Yeah. Okay, that's fine. The final thing I'm going to do is explain why we're beating OG. OG proves like a decent amount of stuff in this round, but again, they're not able to actually overcome this argument, which is that they cannot explain why in the short term you get the capital under their frame necessary to actually keep the teams alive. What we do is extend vertically and explain why you get these things. We are able to co-opt all of their analysis on why this necessarily leads to redistribution, why it increases player salaries, why you can do things like development in the very first place. We also bring like a lot of unique ways to understand this round. For instance, we much better explain why development actually occurs. This is critical for a few reasons. Firstly, development is probably just good for the players themselves in places like Houston because they have access to a new sport. But secondarily, this creates a larger pool of good players in the game, which means that when you do smaller team expansions in the future, like we have access to on our comparative uniquely, you get more players to choose from. This is really critical because the NHL has something called expansion drafts, which means that when you expand teams and create new teams, they have access to players from across the NHL that aren't protected by a certain, like being top 5 player status, which means that when you just have more players in general, you're more likely to be able to do things like expand these smaller teams such that they can compete on our side of the house. So not only are we proving that you get more capital to do these things, but you also get better access to better players. Cool.
Oh wait, sorry. 1 second. 3, 2, 1. Firstly, let me talk about 3 holes within both government teams because they both want to center themselves on revenue. I want to take this revenue clash out of the debate because I think it's really silly. There are 3 problems with this claim fundamentally. First, let's start with OG because I think they do it better than CG. The first thing is I think their TV rights premise is misspecified and is largely asserted. The hit and the big claim is that Quebec City means huge TV deal uplift. This is not a mechanism. This is hope and gambling. There are 3 reasons why this is assertive. The first is that national deals do not move on population. They move on reliable tuning. So the NHL sells average minute audiences across 82 games in their entire season, especially during the midweek winter windows. This is important because big non-hockey markets are discretionary attention markets. They compete with the NBA, they compete with the NFL, they compete with college, and these will be first due to the American ecosystem. This is important because you don't get the baseline rating lifts to the network's price into their multi-year rights just because Houston has people. This is important because the NHL schedulers, like Eamon says, can be gods, but this doesn't matter because ESPN ESPN in this equation is super god, and they won't care about the NHL. They won't price them into their scheduling, and they don't have the ability no matter how smart they are. But two, there's a timing problem. This is important due to the framing that Vidit specifically gives in the PM. That's to say, expansion teams don't convert mass casuals in year 1 to 2. It goes from awareness to trialing to habit, and this takes multiple seasons. And this is important because their own framing that the deal expires soon undercuts their case because the conversion curve won't mature in time to change the headline price. So when you price into this new deal, it's not likely that you convert in time to take advantage of this. So this is actually a harm. It's a vulnerability that exists under OG. But three, local media is fragile. They bundle local carriage under TV rights are stable and good. They're not stable if viewership is thin, if cord cutting and counted calendar make local averages the first thing to wobble, which means that in a non-native market, TV is not safe. It's actually incredibly fragile and it's hard to necessarily win. And this is important because if the national number doesn't move meaningfully, a lot of the claim on we make more money isn't really clear from OG, isn't likely to accrue. I think it kills a bunch of their impacts because all of it is reliant on revenue necessarily being larger on their side. The second problem that I want to engage with is on population and why population in of itself isn't conversion. Three things. One, I think acquisition cuts are actually always higher when incumbents own rituals. So in Houston or Atlanta, right, where there are these sorts of markets, where there's family sports night, youth pathways, and media chatter are already spoken for by other sports and other things, it's difficult because you have to make hockey the third or fourth choice, which means that to do this well, you have to overmarket, you have to discount tickets, you have to fight calendar conflicts. The implication is on their side, this is really costly. It lowers the revenue and prices that you're likely to accrue on the bottom line, which means that this is the opposite of stable multi-year TV money. If you already buy the first piece of ref, the TV money isn't stable. And if there's no pipeline, there's no habits. Without pre-existing youth participation and junior ladders, you lack the thing like, my kid plays hockey, so we watch hockey on Tuesdays and we engage with this. And this means that the loop doesn't exist and the mid-season ratings, which networks necessarily care about, don't really blow up on their side. So it's harder for them to get the sort of population conversion they talk about. And by their logic, by the way, just build later. And this is important because this is the comparative, which was why you buy us, which by the way is substantially more responsive than what we get out of OO, which is to say our world starts with identity and starts with ritual already, which means people are already casually more durable and likely to spend, which implies that their world starts with ads and aspirations, which are relatively brittle, but you have the ability to build grassroots later on our side because they already exist and they're likely to be large. So it's unclear that you convert this. Three, even if you get some revenue upside, and I think this is important, it's the wrong kind of revenue upside because it's high variance, it's brand risky, and it's easily swamped out by the costs that I talked about earlier. Why? The first thing is that variance kills shared value. So if non-native big markets provide, like this, they'll provide some degree of novelty spikes, sure, but they'll provide really big soft winters too. Rights buyers, they care about your price average and they care about consistency. And sponsors price activation, like how much people are consistently watching, into their brand deals, not just your zip code. So this is important because it means that small hockey-first markets produce low variance, they produce consistent amount of TV engagement, and this is important because it sells the product. So you're more likely to get consistent TV rights deals on our side of the house. And if you care about revenue, by the way, and look, it's not just that fans are activated. Fans are more willing to tune in for all the reasons that Arpi gives you in his speech and the whole Canadian identity shit. It means that you're likely to renegotiate terms and be far more locked in far earlier on our side of the house, especially when the 2-year window comes up. So it's likely to mean that our revenue is far less risky. But two, the downside costs on their side are league-wide, and this is important because if a big market experiment underperforms, you have the inventory that isn't really great, you have a drain of your subsidies to support them, you have relocation politics in the NHL, and you have a reputational hit, which means that your future bargaining power within the NHL and within TV rights all goes down on the long run, which means markets with sticky demand don't have these tail risks that exist on the long run. But three, I'd say infrastructure friction. That's to say, Ethan says something that I think is true, but is actually a harmful thing. The stuff about being able to use multi-purpose facilities, which is true for the Raptors, by the way. This actually isn't as good as it sounds, and the reason why it isn't as good as it sounds is because it backfires, because these buildings in of themselves mean that you have scheduling conflicts, you have commute friction, or you have corporate heavy crowds. That's to say that the hockey team here in Toronto, maybe they have to go practice in Mississauga or somewhere else where a rink is actually free because the Raptors are practicing that night within the stadium. They have to uplift the ice, put in the ice and uplift the actual basketball stadium. So it's harder for you to get a consistent practice in your home arena, which is probably pretty bad for these teams. So this is pretty good. There's ice time ecosystems, and that's not generally good. The last thing to say on player and brand outcomes, I think this players get paid more is contingent on the uplift materializing. I don't actually think they do a good job at explaining this. I think if the money magic doesn't actually exist, you don't really have this. I think players actually do prefer stable, sold-out barns, and they don't like the short affiliates, and we provide those necessarily on our side of the house. I'll take Ethan before I wear a case to OO.
The small markets are already priced into all contracts because they're already consumers. On our side, you have millions of potential new consumers and new consumers in the first place, which is what raises the valuation and grows new hockey.
So I think I just gave you a bunch of reasons in the past 5 minutes why it's harder for you to convert those consumers. This is not a good POI. Lastly then, weighing our claim to OO, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to be explicitly responsive to OG's like burden push, which I think is unreasonable, but I think it's going to be better than OO, because I'm going to explain why small market teams will not go bankrupt. There are 2 reasons for this. One, there are levers of the NHL in terms of how they fund them subsidiarily, which I think is better than just relying on like corporations that might exist. But 2, there are lower fees, lower expenses, and a real preference for sports over money in these smaller cities, which is important because it means that you don't need to be profitable to succeed. You don't need to build massive amounts of stadiums. And the bottom line is to meet the burden for ensuring small market teams survive is far better within this responsive material. But lastly, more importantly, on the impact. The first thing I'd say here is that there's a deep belonging and life satisfaction from being able to actualize these things. You plug into thick local rituals. You have youth leagues, Friday radios, school sweaters, and all of this means is that you have a higher meaning. It's less lonely. People tether themselves and tether their life events to hockey in a way that's unique. And this in of itself is an important impact. So we don't give up, like we care about revenue a little bit, and that's why the comparative responses exist within it. But it's far less important than being able to actualize and enjoy the game and push back onto it in a way that's deeply meaningful to their day-to-day. Because it also means that generally speaking, there are far more civic commons you're likely to actualize from this because they all mix underneath the banners of the team. And people feel belonging. And that in of itself is a far bigger impact that's far more important for the world.